Oh my God.
Jesus. Do you like it?
Sometimes you can choose to not be a dick. Yes. Thank you.
I can't take it off. I can't take it off. Like, take it off. I can't. Take it off. I can't take it off. Like, take it off. I can't.
It's Joe. Call me Joe, please. And thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. You mentioned me by name several times. Yeah. Absolutely. Let me just begin by saying that the basic problem with the critique that Jason delivered is that he hadn't read the book. What had happened is he had read criticisms of the book, specifically one written by Richard Carrier, and from that lens, then the kind of understanding of what I was writing and saying is distorted. And so I just wanted to clarify just factual mistakes, okay, in the critique. The first one is really picayune, but it was just sort of kind of eyebrow raising to me. Click marketing videos that I have, but like these YouTube videos that are, he said, are like as good as the History Channel. And it gives the idea that I'm an aggressive self-promoter and that the promotion is better than the theory, basically, is kind of the criticism there. But this is just incorrect because none of the videos are mine. What happened is about 10 years ago, a filmmaker approached me and wanted to use my copyright to create a documentary. And I was paid for this. And then Fritz Heed and Neola Sparkus, who are, as Jason pointed out, really brilliant filmmakers, they created a documentary and a number of videos which are circulating on the internet. I have nothing to do with them. They are 100% his commercial property. My entire marketing budget for Caesar's Messiah over 20 years is less than $200. Just to digress, I took out ads when I decided I would bring my analysis public. I took out 4 ads, I believe, in Biblical Archaeologic Review. I sent out a couple hundred copies of the analysis that they circulated, and I was approached by 2 scholars eventually, J. Harold Ellens and Robert Eisenman. Dr. Ellens was the head of the Society for Biblical Literature, and Dr. Eisenman is the author of James, the Brother of Jesus, well-known New Testament scholar. And they were the ones who basically mentored me, worked with me to get the book published. They convinced me to bring it out as a book. So this is actually the fact, is that I don't have marketing material. The book sells or does not sell just based on word of mouth. It has been, I'm pretty sure, the best-selling book of kind of technical scholarship in New Testament over the last 20 years because it's had such a long standing appeal. It's been, selling in the thousands, well, very strongly for like 20 years, and so that therefore it has a lot more sales than a typical New Testament technical scholarship book. But anyway, so that's just a small point, but it did bug me, so I just thought I'd throw that in. Now, the first mistake is that he claims that I wrote that Josephus wrote the entire New Testament, and he sort of bases all of the criticisms that he makes upon this. The claim is, well, it's insane. I mean, I have never wrote this, never said this. And it shows that he hadn't read the book. He's read the criticism of the book, not the book, because in the book I have one of the longest chapters called The Authors of the New Testament. And I go into the group. It's a large group of families that were involved in the production of the New Testament. Josephus is not one of the candidates. He is, in my opinion, he's probably a nom de plume. I'm not even sure such an individual ever existed. But in any case, the idea that one person would create the New Testament with all of the different language styles is just preposterous. It's a straw man. I think it's one of the criticisms that Carrier brought up, and I think it was just coming from that direction. So it's simply incorrect. He says that
if I may, real quick.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you to Tanker19K Avocados for the $9.99 of support to the channel. We get super chats during the show. That's what that ding is that you probably are hearing.
Okay, great. And also, incidentally, I hope I can become a supporter of your channel. I hadn't been aware of it before, and as we were talking before the show, I really think it's a useful piece of social construction, and I'm glad that you're out there doing this work. Anyway,
appreciate that. Thank you.
Going on, so he talks about the idea that the characters in these parallels that I'm showing are not the same person, and that basically he actually used the word dishonest. Now, this is coming from the guy that he read the criticism of, who also didn't read the book, and so the Carrier never read the book. The person who authored the criticism that Jason then read and then delivered his understanding of it. I'm going to go into at the end of all this. It takes a bit of time, but I'm going to go into what typology is and what I'm actually claiming in terms of relationship, and you can see that the idea that you would have is in fact very trivial, as he pointed out, and it would not be something that you could create the argument that there was an existing parallel or deliberate parallel from. But the typologic argument is it's very, very incremental, and it also includes the most important part of it, which I'll mention now, which Jason didn't mention, and neither did Carrier in his criticism. The most important part of the typological construction is sequence. Sequence, I'll show you how this works in a second. But anyway, going forward, he says that I have puns, which only work in English. I mean, this is just untrue. There are no parallels created by puns. There are several puns that I mentioned. Puns are created by context. They're easy to dispute, obviously. How do you prove a pun's existence? But they're not part of the actual typological relationship. That they're just digressions that I threw into the book. I have never found one that has been by an actual Greek language specialist, like for example, Dr. Ellens, who did the original critique, that have been disputed. So he didn't give any examples, so I don't know what else to say. Now you mentioned the idea of well, why didn't they use this technique more than once? If the Romans were actually, so successful with Christianity, why didn't they use it more than once? Well, in fact, they use it over and over again. They also, and I'll just lump in another of the critique. He said, Jason said that the Jews were spared from worshiping Caesar. Therefore, this couldn't have been a religious construction for the war between the Romans and the Jews. Well, both of these ideas are incorrect. From Caligula forward, the imperial cult became a kind of neurotic obsession with the Caesars, and they insisted that everyone worship in all of their temples the Roman Caesars as God. If Philo wrote a long expose of what Caligula had done in terms of insisting that every synagogue would have a statue, and bear in mind, of course, the Jews have the prohibition against graven images, but that's just too bad. They wanted every temple to have, every synagogue to have a statue. And worse, Caligula then transformed the Temple of Jerusalem, which has this very particular significance to Jews. He transformed it into a temple of his own, and that he called it the Temple of Jupiter. In other words, this is an example of where the Caesars would take on the identities of a pre-existing god. All right, which is what Christianity is, in fact. So this is an example of this technique of the Roman Caesars basically establishing themselves as another divine person. Another example would be Vespasian. On the day that he became Caesar, he was in Alexandria. He went into the temple of Seriphus to have a religious moment. He had a divine intervention, and he came out and declared himself the new Seriphus, which was a popular religion in the area. And he then proceeded to work two miracles. He cured a withered arm, and he cured blindness by rubbing spittle on the eyes of the blind person. Now, both of those miracles end up in the Gospels. Okay, so this is a very clear-cut example of reusing this technique, because the miracles that Vespasian used when he went out to the population of Alexandria and gained favor with them by becoming the new Seriphus, then were reused in the Gospel. So it's a very, very clear and direct, kind of parallelism between the Christianity and the prior behaviors of the Caesars. It's also Jason also talks about that there wasn't a religious basis for the war, but this is simply incorrect. Gessius Florus, who was the procurator of Judea at the time of beginning of the war, he went into the temple, took the money out, Temple of Jerusalem, took the money out, and then erected statues of himself and Nero. This led to the high priest Eleazar refusing to pay tribute or sacrifice to Caesar, which was accompanied by rebellion by the people in the streets of Jerusalem. And this, in fact, was the beginning of the war, because this directly led to the legions that Florus was in charge of. The Jews defeated them, and then were able to establish a nation state right inside the Roman Empire. Now, there was also the idea that I wrote that the New Testament was intended for Messianic Jews inside Palestine. Again, this is cloud cuckoo land. There is absolutely no way that the New Testament would ever have been seen as anything other than blasphemy by the Messianic Jews inside Palestine. The New Testament was written in Greek, and if you look at the churches that you could see Christian congregations, according to the book of Revelations, being developed in, they encircle Judea. And this is because the actual political purpose for Christianity was given by Josephus very clearly. What they were afraid of is that the Messianic rebels and zealots inside Judea would engage in missionary activity with the more secular Jews that were throughout the Roman Empire. So what the idea, the political idea of Christianity, was to create a kind of theological barrier so that the missionaries would have a harder time bringing the zealotry into the congregations of Jews that lived throughout the Roman Empire. The population of Jews throughout the empire was much higher than people think. It was over 10%, at least according to the statistics I've seen. So it was a huge population. They were everywhere, all over the place. Rome didn't want the missionary activity to take place. And so this would have been the political purpose for developing the Gospels and Christianity. It really didn't work. Christianity really was only successful in general because of the Roman state support. The Jews had a rebellion from exactly these diaspora populations that they would have attempted to have Christianity be inserted into. They had the rebellion called the Kiddos Rebellion, 112, 115, which was just a bloodbath. The Jews depopulated the island of Cyprus, 250,000 people. So you can see how ferocious the religious structure of the war was, and how the various kind of positions that Jason was making are not really related much to history. Now, as far as the critique in terms of like, well, how is the literature being critiqued, and what is the literature? And typology is different than sort of normal literature. It has different standards. And what I was claiming, what I've written about in Seed of Messiah is just a completely kind of unique sort of literary construction. And I want to give an example of it because it's real easy to understand. And I told you before the show that I thought that perhaps I could actually convince people, or at least start the process by which they would understand that the Romans certainly invented the religion. Now, I'm just going to give a basically what I call the primer for the typologic system. Okay, everyone knows one half of it. Everyone people are familiar with Christianity, story of Jesus, would know this, but they don't know the origins of it. And so this will actually, I think, be of interest to people. Now, the Gospels begin, first page, where you have the story of Jesus's. Basically, it's called his adult life. His adolescent life. It starts out in Matthew 2:13 with the story of Joseph going to Egypt. Joseph is motivated by dreams, and for some reason he feels that his family would be safer in Egypt, and off they go. In Matthew 2:16, you have the famous story of Herod massacring the boys. He's trying to kill Jesus, so there is the massacre of the children, but they're safe because they've left. Matthew 2:20, the family's in Egypt, and a divine person comes up to them and says, they are dead which sought the young child's life. So that precipitates the Matthew 2:21, where you go from Egypt to Israel. Okay, now then at 3:13, you have the famous baptism story. John the Baptist, Jesus passes through water and has that experience. Now, at Matthew 4:4, you go into the wilderness for 40 days. 40 days. And there you have the three temptations of Jesus by Satan. You have these odd statements, quotes, tempted by bread in the first case, do not tempt God in 4:7. And then in 4:10, you have this, the statement is Jesus tells Satan to worship only God. Okay, so that's the story of Jesus's pre-ministry, basically, in broad stroke. Now, what the average person is completely unaware of is that this is all fiction. It is typological connection, because all of these episodes
host. You are now in the host room and can manage your callers from the call-in studio web interface.
From stories in the Old Testament. Now, the stories are Genesis and 45:50, you have the story of Joseph going to Egypt, precipitated by dreams. Exodus 1, the Pharaoh massacres the boys. Exodus 4, you have a quote that is reused in the Gospels: "All the men are dead which sought your life." Now in Exodus 12, you've got the same journey from Egypt back to Israel. Now here you have one I'm going to go back and talk about a bit. Exodus 14, you have the Israelites passing through water. All right, Jesus in Matthew goes submerged to become baptism, but in Exodus 14, you have passing through water. Now, then the Israelites go into the wilderness, not for 40 days, but for 40 years. Okay, typology is not verbatimism. It's simply the creation of relationships using just enough information to create kind of a secret message. But in the wilderness, you have the Jesus portraying Yahweh in the Gospels, but Satan in the Old Testament is the Israelites themselves. giving you an idea of kind of the political construction of the literature. But you have the three quotes. The quotes are, again, they were taken directly from the Old Testament. The tempted by bread in Exodus 16, Exodus 17, do not tempt God, Exodus 32, worship only God. So the entire story of Jesus's pre-ministry is a typologic construction that has been developed to show him as having basically this connection into the life of Moses. Jesus is going to become basically a new Moses, a new leader of Israel. Now, Jason talked about that the analysis was dishonest. And I don't blame him. I mean, he was just taken to a dark and bad place by Carrier's review, which was just preposterous. And incidentally, I responded to Carrier's review with a piece called PhD Who Drowned at Gadara, which Carrier's never responded to. And some people have described it as like a bulldozer rolling over an ice cream cone. But in any case, make of it what you will. But obviously there was a response to Carrier's critique, which then Jason was paraphrasing. If you look at this particular passage, you can see the kind of the issues. In Matthew 13, Jesus goes underwater in his baptism. Now, this is, in some way reasonably kind of parallel to what the Israelites go through, but it's not completely clear. However, there isn't, the location is not the same. And it's very, very easy to dispute that this would be, a related parallel. However, the sequence is what gives you the information. The fact that in both of these stories that I gave, the passing through water occurs at this particular point relative to the traveling from Egypt to Israel and before the journey into the wilderness, it shows you that this is a related, but very, it's not verbatimism at all. It's not the same individuals, it's not the same body of water, it's not even the same way of passing through water. But in Matthew, they make sure that people know that the typological construction was established because they use a sentence which an alert reader will recognize as coming from Exodus, where they say that God appears and he says, out of Egypt I have called my son. And so this is the, kind of the way that you can absolutely be certain that you have a parallel construction and one that is deliberate. So the main thing which holds this all together and what really I show in Caesar's Messiah is the sequence, is that all of these events occur in the same sequence in both sides. And it is the overall construction of the sequence that makes you absolutely certain that, one is basically linking to the other. Okay, so in Caesar's Messiah, what I show is that the story that Josephus records in Wars of the Jews has the same system of typology, that you have at the beginning here in Matthew. So that whereas in Jesus' pre-ministry, you look back to Moses, in the adult ministry of Jesus, it looks forward to Titus. Now, you can see that right off the bat, that if you just know the dates, that there is something fishy about all this, to use an expression, because Jesus's crucifixion is circa Passover 33. Now, there is a perfect 40-year cycle to the conclusion of the Jewish War, which concludes on Passover 73. Jesus has established himself as the new Passover lamb, right? So the 40-year cycle that the Jews experienced from the story of Exodus to the passing into the promised land where they take possession of Israel is 100% mirrored in the relationship between Jesus and the Roman Caesar, Vespasian, and Titus, because there you have the Jesus's crucifixion and the creation of the human Passover lamb in 33. And then in 73 Passover, you have the 40-year perfect cycle, and then you have the conclusion of the war. And now you have the new covenant. Whereas Jesus establishes the new covenant when in the Roman humor, when they take possession of all of this land, when they actually conquer the Messianic movement and then restore the area of Israel to the Roman Caesars. This is the kind of comic point to the whole process of the religious literature. Now, what I do in Caesar's Messiah is I take all of the parallels that were established, just as they had been established, earlier in my description of the Moses Jesus typology. Okay, when you look at the ministry of Jesus, you'll see that there's well over 40 of these parallels contained in the ministry of Jesus, which are typological foreseeing of what goes on in Titus's campaign. And you can easily identify them once you understand the system, because they occur in the same sequence, just like the Moses Jesus typology that I showed earlier. If you look at what happens between Jesus and then the campaign of the Rome as they went to reconquer Judea, this is where you have all of these bizarre relationships, which end up to a kind of a typological foreseeing. It's actually it's a mockery of the typology in the Jewish literature.
So, if I can, I have a comment from the chat here. Chris, the atheist pastor, he says 3 of the New Testament. Three of the New Testament books were written before Titus was emperor. Josephus, and he says English. It's my first language. He says Josephus didn't mention Jesus apart from a passing comment, and it's a known fraud. So if Josephus didn't really mention Jesus, and 3 of the books were written before Titus was emperor, how does that affect your theory?
Well, it would void it if they were correct. But the fact is that his idea that the Gospels are written prior is incorrect. I mean, the entire ministry of Jesus is concerning the destruction in 70 AD, right? He talks about the temple's going to be raised, the walls will be raised, the temple's going to be destroyed, you're going to have the abomination of desolation. So Jesus is looking forward to the authors are looking backwards 40 years when they established Jesus. So the idea that the Gospels are written before that is irrational. It would be, I mean, if you're a religious person, you can make the case, but I would suggest to this minister that he read my book if he really wants to see how well that man can
if I may, I'm sorry. Atheist pastor, Chris, atheist pastor. He's a fellow YouTuber here on the YouTube. He's an atheist, and he does have a channel. He's from Australia, or that's what he wants you to believe. Anyway, he's from Australia, and he does have his own channel, and he was in training to be a pastor, but he's not really a pastor. He that's just his YouTube channel. His name, atheist pastor Chris Atwill, is his name.
Oh, anyway,
go ahead.
He would be right if he could date the Gospels. It would be a problem for my theory. But the fact is, it's demonstrable that these things are written after the war, because all of the events from the war find their way into the Gospels. So therefore, I'm sorry, but his idea is void. You can't, if he is in fact a non sort of religious perspective of the literature person, then he would know that you can't talk about the encircling Jerusalem with the wall are the raising of the temple before these events occurred. So the obvious fact is they're written after the fact, which would mean they were written post 70 AD. So there you have it. Now, moreover, the connections that I show, some are, just basically the same thing. Many are complicated. Like in the exchange with Carrier I had, he would critique them in a certain way, showing that, well, when you look at it from kind of a verbatim perspective, which then Jason, I believe his name was, he then mirrored this critique and said, well, like it doesn't make much sense or whatever. But in fact, what I show is I show that the whole adult ministry of Jesus, from fishing for men at the Sea of Galilee all the way through his the crucifixion and the final chapter where you have Simon condemned and John spared, that all of this was constructed from the story of the Roman war. There isn't really there's nothing left of Jesus's ministry, at least certainly in the Gospels, that you can't really identify very precise. The Old Testament stories, which are being repeated, and then you also have what hasn't been seen is that the authors also used all of these events from the war to construct the ministry of Jesus. Just like there's, in fact, you can. It's fairly easy to just use other people's analysis. You don't have to use mine with the things which are completely self-evident. And you can form a long list of events which far greater that could ever happen accidentally, showing that there is dependency between the story of Jesus's ministry and the story of the Roman war. Just as like, and they are contained sequentially. This is the important thing, is that once you get into the rhythm and see that actually, just as in the first example I gave, the way you can really identify what's called the Jesus-Moses typology, where I was talking about the relationship between Jesus's pre-ministry and how the story was constructed out of the Old Testament story about Moses, is that they're constructed in the same sequence. And the sequence provides, coherency and also demonstrates deliberate construction. You have things which are not, in Caesar's Messiah, I show, like the 50 connections between Jesus and the military campaign of the Flavians, showing that Jesus, in fact, is predicting the Son of Man's identity. Okay, just to back up, so for clarification, Jesus predicts the Son of Man is going to come, right? But he doesn't use himself. He doesn't say, I'm going to show up. He says this title, the Son of Man. And he says he's going to come after, these events. And he gives examples of events from the Roman war, the war that is forthcoming. So the question is, well, who is the Son of Man then? Who is this individual? Well, the authors know perfectly well that they're talking about Caesar. They're not talking about some individual. They're talking about the person who came at the exact time that Jesus predicted and then won the war. So when you look at the history that they recorded of the war, you'll see things like that, and these are things which I'm not the first one to have noticed these things. What I did was I noticed that they occur in the same sequence. But many people, like for example, there's like Jesus says in in Matthew 16:14, he says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whoever binds on earth will be bound in heaven. Whoever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now, if you're following along, you'll notice that this is actually kind of similar to a statement in the correct place in the sequence, where Josephus writes, "O Father, it is but just that the scandal of a prisoner should be taken off Josephus together with the iron chains. For if we do barely loose his bonds, but cut them to pieces, he will be like a man that has not been bound at all." Now, you can obviously you can go, well, it's not exactly the same, but you can see the parallelism. It's like the beginning, the typological relationship I showed between Moses and Jesus. You have concepts which are they are similar, but then they are held in place by verbatimisms, which you can actually see. Well, this is how the whole sequence is constructed. With in the story of Jesus, you have, for example, after that event where I talked about, where they talk about the binding and loosening, you then have Jesus's trip to Jerusalem, and this would be mirroring exactly when Titus goes to Jerusalem. So the physical, as in the first example, the example between Jesus and Moses, where the physical places are occurring in the same sequence, you now have the same thing occurs here. You go from Galilee and you go to Jerusalem. Jesus makes the same journey, and then I show that there are like 50 of these things which are occurring in the same sequence. Some of them are actually have been recognized by many other scholars. I could give dozens of examples, but just Jesus says, he says, "Do you suppose I came to give peace on earth? I tell you, not at all, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. That's kind of a kind of a weird thing. But if you are following along in the sequence I show you, you'll read in Wars of the Jews at the exact right place in the sequence that Josephus says, well, the followers of John also did now seize upon the inner temple and upon all the warlike engines therein, and then ventured to oppose Simon. And thus that sedition, which had been divided into 3 factions, was now reduced to 2. So you can see that, well, that's an odd parallel. There is parallelism there. Obviously all of the parallels except for the very overt ones, and there are some of those, but they're occurring in the same sequence. And you cannot, this is not possible to be occurring accidentally. You can't have the sedition, which has been divided into 3 factions, was now reduced to 2. And at the same time in the other story say, well, from now on, 5 in one house will be divided, 3 against 2 and 2 against 3. It could not be, it could happen accidentally once, but it cannot happen in sequence. I show that the primary reason to believe this is that these things occur in sequence, and some of which are very abstract, and others which for example, this would be the ones that like Carrier would provide criticism of, the most complex abstract ones. But some of them are like, well, he encircles with a wall. Jerusalem, Jesus predicts the history is it certainly gets encircled with a wall. You have the raising of the temple. These things are occurring in a very precise sequence, and that's really what enables you to understand all this. Now,
I have another question from the chat for you when you're ready.
Sure, of course. Right. No, go ahead.
Iron Charioteer asks, the Greco-Judean culture was heavily into astrology and creating stories based on astrology. Do you think Carrier makes sense with his follows Space Jesus?
Actually, I do. I think Carrier makes pretty good argument. The problem is it's completely unprovable one way or another. I mean, it's simply logic and conjecture. Pretty good argument, makes sense. I think there's a bit of truth in what Carrier's position is, the astrological influence. But I think that the idea that Christianity was a Roman construction, I mean, I think I just can demonstrate it, because the sequence I give and the relationships is, it's like 50 events, and I mean, some of them are very vague, but others would be so absolutely clear cut that you would never, I mean, no one would, no one could dispute them. And so This is the sort of I just think it's a different quality of evidence, that when you have sequence, when you have of this length, it becomes very, very difficult to because the parallels, so many of them are, you would just be, if it's like the encircling Jerusalem with the wall. It's not really sort of, some of them kind of have metaphors. You have to kind of, it's very easy to criticize someone that way, but some, like encircling with the wall, the historical event is predicted by Jesus, and it occurs at exactly the right time in Jesus's ministry, his prediction, as to overlay the actual military campaign of Titus. And well, it just QED. That's, what can you do? It's
I just want to mention, I'm going to go ahead and start taking calls. So if people want to call in, 940-DAMN-SHOW, we'll have people call and visit with us about it. Go ahead.
Right. So I just wanted to give so you have the encircling of Jerusalem with the wall, Jesus predicts, Titus campaigns, and then you have things like, if you're following in the sequence, you'll have, Jesus would say, well, for which of you intending to build a tower does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has had enough to finish it, lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all can see, begin to mock him, saying that this man began to build but was not able to be finished. This is at the point in Josephus where Titus goes around the wall looking for the best place to build a tower. You actually have the build a tower concept is actually presented there.
Of course.
I'm gonna have my cat is crying. Hold on a second. Yeah, come on.
Understood. I'm all about fur babies, so yeah.
If she'd start crying, you could hear it. Anyway, but that kind of parallel, the idea of like the best place to build a tower. Jesus says, who's intending to build a tower, and these are, one can easily dispute them as circumstance if there was simply, one parallel being applied, one passage being applied to another. But that's number 26 in the sequence. And you see, it's not really even particularly strong one. And so you can't have a sequence of length like that, where you'd have above average, kind of seeing the connection between one passage and another, going, yeah, it looked like one may have kind of relationship to the other. You can't have a passage like, you can't have sequences like that in sequence. And that's really what is the major discovery. Most of the parallels I show have been seen by other scholars. I'm not the first person to notice that there was a relationship about building a tower, or the encircling Jerusalem with the wall. These things are just absolutely axiomatic to Christian scholarship. What they hadn't done, surprisingly, was just look at them all in a list and see the sequence, because that's really the strong evidence, is that the parallels, some are metaphorical, can be disputed, some are just self-evident, like the one I gave about building a tower. It's just hard to dispute, they're not parallel. And you cannot have a sequence of these things accidentally. It's the same thing as a slot machine. If you when you hit it, it is in defiance of the way they set up the probabilities for the payouts. So sequence is very, very important, and it's really the evidence, is that when you go through Caesar's Messiah, the book, and I show, okay, well, these are the parallels. I'd say well over half of them have been seen by other scholars. Well over half of the 45 I show have been seen by other scholars. They've written about them, but they just haven't noticed the sequence. Like, for example, one of the criticisms was given by Jason in the show you did before. He talked about that there was a story where you have a Mary and a Lazarus, and these are common names, and it would be kind of inappropriate to link the two together. I was being sort of nebulous in doing so. But the fact is, the story that they are contained in is about a human Passover lamb. You see, a human Passover lamb. Now, there are only two of these that have ever been described. There's one in Josephus that Jason described the people in the story, though he didn't describe the human Passover lamb, and the one in the Gospels. Now, obviously, because it's such a bizarre concept, you would think that, well, there might be some relationship between the two. But when you have the sequence, when you go, well, this, like I said, okay, well, how to build the tower, these different events occurring that are parallel occurring in the same sequence, and you come to something like that, and it is in exactly the same spot as it was in both stories, then it just cannot be circumstantial. I just wanted to give, because there's actually sort of a kind of a nice clarification that you can have just about Christianity in general. The story of Jesus's crucifixion, where you have a group of 3 being crucified and one of them survives Jesus. Well, this is mirrored by the story in Josephus, where you have a group of 3 being crucified. Josephus, whose name is actual Joseph Bar Matthias, he comes and he begs the Roman commander to take them down from the cross. He does, and then one miraculously survives. Now, this occurs in the same place in the sequence that I give of all of these little stories, in the same place in both Jesus' ministry and in the history of Josephus. But the real giveaway that this is one story is based on the other is the name of the person who takes him down from the cross. I mean, Joseph of Arimathea, if you look at the Greek representation, is only 2 letters off of Joseph Bar Matthias, who's in the historian of the Roman Jews. So the fact is that both of the people who beg the Roman commander to take the individual down from the cross, Joseph Arimathea, Joseph Bar Matthias, are homophonically linked. It's just in such a story with so many connections, a group of 3, and the fact one survives, it's just self-evident that this is deliberate typology. In fact, I suspect that in the original versions, it was actually Joseph of Arimathea would have been called Joseph Bar Matthias. They wouldn't have changed the name, because there is actually recordings of Joseph of Arimathea, the character in the gospel, wherein his name is just simply given Joseph Bar Matthias, which would be the way that Josephus would represent his name verbatim in the gospel. So when you have a long list like this of things which are, some are absolutely verbatim, like encircling Jerusalem with the wall or the raising of the temple. And then others, like the story I just gave about the crucifixion, where you have these very, very weird, Joseph Arimathea, Joseph Bar Matthias, that's strange, begging the Roman commander to take him down from the cross. There's 3 people, one of them survives. How can these stories be accidental? But not deliberately related, but when you see them in an overall pattern of 40 stories, certainly that one story is being generated from the other. And so this is, the story of Caesar's Messiah, is that most of the parallels I show have actually been seen by other scholars. It's just what they didn't notice was that they're all in the same sequence. And that's why the little analysis I did at the beginning, where the story that connects Jesus to Moses is most able to be identified by looking at it in sequence. Sequence is really the key to seeing this hidden understanding of what the author is saying. This is the same thing with Jesus and Titus's military campaign. It is because it occurs in the same sequence. Now bear in mind, at the conclusion, Josephus actually talks about the Messiah, and he goes, the Jews had this prophecy that the Messiah belonged to them. It was going to be a Jewish person. But actually, as events have shown us, he really, the people who had this oracle thinking about the Messiah, he was really talking about the Flavian Caesar. Right. So that's about as clear. That's actually in Wars of the Jews, and that's about as, when you compare that statement of fact with all of this typological linkage, you can see pretty well that Josephus, who wrote this inside the Flavian court, it's not like he was some, Judean philosopher. He was brought back to Rome by the Flavians, where he was supposed to do a history of the war. I mean, now I think you can see that the Gospels, with their bizarre pro-Roman perspective, were they were just a part of the Roman technique of trying to absorb the religions of their provinces as best they could. It worked ultimately, though it didn't work within the second and third century, because the Jews continued to rebel. The Messianic movement wasn't really extinguished in terms of political force, military force, until 133, 135 with the Bar Kokhba rebellion.
Well, real quick, atheist pastor Chris Atwill wants to point out, he said Josephus, damn it, I just can't say Josephus today. Josephus was born after Jesus would have died. He wrote Antiquities of the Jews at least 25 years after the Gospels of Mark. Now, I thought you addressed that by stating that these books, some of these were written 30 years in the past.
I'd like to say that he has drank the Kool-Aid, unfortunately, and I mean, if he has an example of a gospel that can be dated, to 40 CE, I will stand corrected. But the fact is, the Gospels are written after the Roman-Jewish War. I mean, what he should try to do is explain why all the events from the Roman-Jewish War end up in the Gospels, if in fact the Gospels are written before the Roman-Jewish War. I mean, it flatly states in the Gospels that the temple is going to be raised, and then Jerusalem is going to be encircled with the wall, and you're going to have this abomination of desolation event occurred. These are literally specific recorded. So unless there is some kind of divinity, in operation here, the Gospels were written after the war. The Gospels are a reflection of the war, and this is the only correct perspective of them. And I'm afraid that the gentleman's simply incorrect.
Well, that's my problem. Part of my fault, my sin here, if you will, is I just don't know enough about this. And my GFL on this subject is pretty low. And one of the deals is that I didn't realize it was such a controversial subject. Now, I suspected it would be a controversial subject among Christians. I didn't realize the atheist community would be so, controversial about it. To me, and this is when I was asked about it yesterday by Andy, we were talking about the coming up show. I was like, well, it sounds as plausible as any other where Jesus came from ideas, as I've heard. I just didn't realize there was such a passionate discourse between it. Now, I see that there's these things going on. Would you be willing to come back on the show possibly? Now, you said you'd like to talk to Jason if we can get Jason back, but you understand Jason's schedule doesn't really allow him time. When he lets me, I'll let you know, and if you can make it. But we also have people like Chris, atheist pastor, who I will tell you knows a lot more about the Bible than I do. And there is Kool-Aid. There's lots of different Kool-Aid, and I just don't know who's drinking what Kool-Aid. I know I'm drinking Kool-Aid.
I mean, let me just say that for criticism, just email me at Joe Atwill, my name, without spaces, at gmail.com. I will answer the criticism if I can get to it. Right now, there's a lot going on. My schedule's not great. I will try to come back on the show when I can. If you have specific criticisms, just send them to me. Believe me, I hate to say it. I know it's a hard thing for people to accept, but really, the analysis I show is pretty concrete. It's going to be very difficult for someone who actually reads the book. I know that Jason had read the criticism of it, but hadn't read the book. One thing that someone might want to do, if you've seen Carrier's criticism, is to there is a response called Richard Carrier, the PhD that drowned at Gadara. And you can go to a Caesar's Messiah website, and it's there. It doesn't cost any money. And you can see the response, which I think is pretty well devastating. Carrier's criticism was not, very, very strong. But there has been obviously, Caesar's Messiah has been enormously criticized. but it's also been probably the best-selling book of technical Christian scholarship in the last 20 years. And I have no promotion budget. I'm telling you, it's actually, I have a very sort of nice lifestyle. I don't need to do this in a professional way. I saw the relationship, won't go into my history, but I was raised a Christian, had a lot of background in just reading of the gospel, because I grew up in Japan, where, this was the school I grew up in had that as one of the curriculum pieces. And so, I had this background, I did research, and just had the insight that really what you have with the ministry of Jesus is a typologic construction. Typology. It's not verbatimism, but it's a rough approximation of what goes on in the war. And then once I started to plug in all of the different, elements of the Gospels into the war, I could see this would have been done deliberately. I was very reluctant to bring it out. Took years before I was convinced to do so. I did. I'm not sure it was a good idea, but here it is. And anyone who reads the book, I would say, just based on, I would say it would have like an 85% rate of conversion to my position. I'm not tooting my horn. That's just people who read Caesar's Messiah would have, by what I can gather. Right. It's been a very enormous bestseller in the field, even though there's no promotion budget. It's all word of mouth. So, and in fact, there's so many pieces of the analysis now that are available on the internet. If someone doesn't really want to spend the $20 for the book, they can do a pretty good review of this material just by, using Google. Right. So,
well, I watched the movie. There's a deal on YouTube you can go watch. I watched it recently. I thought it was well produced, but I'm a very distracted person, and I got to admit, it was over on that monitor. As a person who makes videos, I thought, wow, technically it looked great. But I don't know. Again, I don't know enough about this situation.
Fritz Heed, the movie was, he had read the book and wanted to do a film representation, and we worked out an arrangement where he did the movie, but he owns the movie. It isn't my movie. It's a movie that my research is basically the focus, but it wasn't. I didn't make the movie. It's not my movie.
You froze when you said the name of the gentleman who made the movie. Whose movie is it? You said
Fritz Heed.
Gotcha.
Fritz Heed and Neola Sparkus. They were the producers who actually wrote most of the dialogue. But they had really done a tremendous amount of research into my book. So the documentary is a very kind of good visual representation of the theory. But I think you can get the best understanding of what occurred by actually looking at the words, and that would be, you'd find that in Caesar's Messiah, which is really what I do is I take the actual passages that are related, and I simply lay them out side by side. I think in the prior show, Jason was saying that I somehow changed the words. I mean, this is incorrect. I could give you the passages in what I call the there's a chapter that I review all of this in, and there's no kind of paraphrasing at all. I take the actual passage in Josephus and the actual passage in the Gospel, and I put them side by side. I don't change the text whatsoever. So, it's the evidence is, once you kind of get into the rhythm of the typological construction, it's so clear and straightforward. I don't really have to do much in the way of narration.
Well, like I was saying, if you want, Andy Hall would, I believe, possibly enjoy the opportunity to just openly debate you on your theories. And Chris Atlee might as well. I don't know if you'd enjoy that sort of thing. I didn't know. Whenever you said you wanted to come on the show and explain things, I thought you wanted to explain your side. And then before the show, you said you were actually looking forward to having some of those hard questions. And, so we could possibly arrange that. I just don't personally know enough about those subjects.
That's the thing. It's such a technical thing. It actually is. And I wonder, I don't think that either, I certainly don't think that the guy who Jason had read the book, none of these people read the book. If they read the book and produce criticism that's coherent, I'll be happy to come on and answer it. As far as like a general sort of instruction in the book, right now I'm just too busy for that kind of stuff, but I'll be happy to answer any actual criticism of it. And I'd also be happy to do it in writing if they want, if that's easier. But I'll be happy to come back on the show. Because of this is not a great time for me in terms of time. There's so much going on. As you know, there's some things going on in the world that are pressing. So anyway, but please, I gave my email address. Anyone who has any technical questions, or if they have what they feel is a contradiction or something that I was unaware of, I mean, for heaven's sake, send it to me. I'll be happy to respond. Okay, excellent. Good deal. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up now. Thank you for making the hour with me. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it. It was fun, and good luck to you. I just think that, we were talking before the show, I was saying it's just so important that we have like a citizens media. You can kind of see with, my position on the Gospels, you can see the oligarchs have their control over information in the press, and shows like yours are really, the antidote to that. So, congratulations on your show, and I'll try to come back on again if my time permits, huh? Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody in the damnation, all those wonderful people who in the chat are watching. I was so busy and distracted this morning. It didn't matter. My audio wasn't working before the show anyway. So thank you to everybody who is watching. You haven't sent comments directly to me, I'll be happy to respond. Any sort of it's like email boxes sometimes it's daunting. There's too many stuff in it, but I'll try to get back to you with most of the questions and things are easy. Don't take any time to respond to, so I'll be happy to do it. Anyway, goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Bye. Bye.
Oh my God.
Jesus. Do you like it?
Sometimes you can choose to not be a dick. Yes. Thank you.
I can't take it off. I can't take it off. Take it off. I can't. Take it off. I can't take it off. Take it off. I can't.
Thank you for watching the show. A special shout out to my gold level Patreon supporters, Cindy Plaza and Ian Davenport. Thank you and have a great day.